Oh, admit. Hello, Matthew. How are you going?
I'm good, Dean. How are you, mate?
Yeah, good. Thank you. Sorry, I was running a fraction late there,
That's all
but
right. No stress.
looks like we've got a good turnout. So we'll get straight into it. So welcome everyone to this week's episode of Points, Lines, and Polygons. Um, Today we're talking with um, Matthew George from Alcoa. Um, and so all the way over in the West. And so a little bit earlier for you, but lunchtime for us on the East Coast. Um, so for those who haven't attended an episode of Points, Lines, and Polygons from four, it's really just a general chat with our guest about their career and their progression and where they are today. At the end, if we've got time, we'll have some questions. But if you have questions along the way, you can just put them into the chat and we'll answer them as we can get to them. So, so welcome, Matthew. Thanks for being our guest for today. Um,
Thanks for having
so
me.
yeah, so so it's really just a bit about finding about yourself, how you got started in the spatial industry, and then and where you ended up today. And so you can really go back as far as you like. You know, if you want to talk about your uni days and what you studied and that sort of stuff, you can. Otherwise, happy to start wherever you like.
Yeah, cool. No worries. No, thanks, Dean. Yeah, look, I guess I had a pretty unorthodox entry into the spatial industry. I actually started out, well, when I left high school, I wanted to go and do engineering. I didn't last too long at uni doing that. I did less than 6 months and decided to go and join the rest of my friends and work in mining. So I jumped in and started scaffolding actually with a friend of mine who'd started a business. So I was doing that for a little while, and then I got into Alcoa. So because of I'm living south of Perth, actually not too far from Alcoa's operations in WA. It's kind of when you grow up in the area, everyone's parents all worked at Alcoa, and everyone wants to work at Alcoa. So it was kind of the thing to do, and I was pretty fortunate to get in with Alcoa there. I actually started as a trades assistant in the mobile maintenance workshop. So I started there, and after a few years of doing that, I sort of started getting bored. I didn't enjoy the monotony of just, a lot of holding up workshop floors and servicing machines. It's very repetitive and just didn't really challenge me as much as I liked. So I started looking at, what I could do to get back into, well, potentially studying again. Fortunately, Alcoa had a program that let me go and study, and I decided to go do mine surveying. So I sort of thought I'll give that a go and see if it's a bit my uncle is a cadastral surveyor, licensed surveyor over here. So again, I sort of thought, well, I'll give it a go, see what it's like. If I don't like it, then I can transition into something else. Yeah, so I jumped into that, and then the financial crisis happened around about the same time, and all the funding got cut. So I didn't last too long there. I did about 12 months. I got knocked off a couple of units, trying to work full time at the same time, pay a mortgage. So the mortgage won out. So I ended up
Always
pulling the
hard.
pin again. Yeah. So it gets a bit tricky. So it was yeah, again, just the decision I made at the time. And then fortunately for me, I was given a chance by someone else in the business to pick up as an exploration surveyor's assistant in the exploration team. So yeah, I was offered that role. I did that for when I jumped into that role. Basically, the manager there, the exploration manager, he's been one of my biggest supporters actually throughout my whole career. Yeah, particularly since I joined the spatial industry. But yeah, he was keen for me to go back and keep studying, but wanted me to start out at TAFE. So wanted me to finish my diploma first and then go back into uni and carry on from there. When I was doing my diploma, I realised pretty quickly that I enjoyed the technical side of things a lot more than the field work. The field work was, interesting to a point, but yeah, again, I just found I had a bit more of a knack for the technical piece. So when I finished my diploma, I decided to go and switch my degree from surveying major to a GIS major. But I also got offered a job at the Trimble dealership at the same time as finishing my diploma over here. So I actually took that role and left Alcoa for a period of time, and I picked up a role as a technical support person for machine guidance and laser scanning and for geotechnical monitoring. So again, really good insight into, the technology and the things that I've not had exposure to. Coming from exploration, it was pretty typical sort of, survey work, bread and butter stuff where you're just using a GPS in the field. Actually, when I started, we were using a tape and optical square to put pegs into the ground. So it was really, really rudimentary surveying work. And it was just the nature of the area that the environment we were working in, the technology that was available with the costs. So it was but by the time I finished up, we'd actually implemented, using RTK GPS in the field to actually set the pegs out and stuff like that. So it was a bit of a change, but it was still, again, pretty monotonous. So when the job offer came through from Hayfell Eliza at the time, they're now UPG. I jumped at it. Didn't have any kids or anything, so it was kind of like, look, I've got to make the most of this now. My partner was super supportive, so she was keen for me to give it a go, just because, why not? So yeah, took that on. That was really good. I did that for a period of time. It didn't last as long as I'd have liked, but the travel to and from Perth, this is pre-COVID, so it was I was doing an hour and a half each way travel minimum, and that was, depending on what the traffic was like and stuff like that. So
Yep.
It started out okay. I could stomach it for a bit, but it wore thin pretty quickly. So but again, really good insight into that world as well. So I've got a lot of exposure to, developers at Trimble and stuff like that, looking at the software under the hood and how things actually worked. And that was really sparked my interest in the technology piece. From there, I actually got offered a job with a local survey company down here as the technical manager. It was basically the equivalent of an engineering manager or survey engineering manager, sorry. So doing a lot of laser scanning work, working in plant, doing some design work, so doing a bit of modeling and things like that. Really interesting. And again, I did that for some time. They actually had the major contract for Alcoa's residue area as well here. So I fortunately got to spend a lot of time back at Alcoa, but this time outside of the mining space, but in the refining side of things. That was, again, really good sort of experience and understanding a bit more about the engineering space. I hadn't had a lot of exposure to it, and really opened up my eyes to how difficult that space is in comparison to your typical mining sort of workflows. Just the attention to detail that's required, and the expectation from the customers, the engineers that are expecting millimeter accuracy in a world where that's near on impossible. It's these sorts of things, and you get very good at engaging with the customers and helping them to understand what's actually possible. That was really good too. And then after, I think I was there for about 18 months, might have been 2 years all up, I actually got a call from my old boss in exploration saying, hey, we've got a role that we want to put on to look after all of basically to become a technical support role pretty much, and in business improvement. So I accepted, so I took that on board, and then I was back at Alcoa again. So that was a really good role. And at that point, when I walked in, it was a brand new role, so I kind of got to make it what I wanted. And it ended up being a lot around automation, and turning a lot of their manual, paper-based workflows into digital workflows. So it was a combination of GIS, understanding the equipment in the field and what's possible, and actually looking at things like, we started building, using tools like Power Apps, for example, to digitize workflows that were, previously paper-based. Really, really interesting work. And I was very fortunate that I was sort of given just told basically, you make it what you will, you go and do what you think is the best thing. And it gave me a lot of exposure to a lot of different things that I kind of had no idea about, and probably wouldn't have had as much exposure to it if I had stuck to a typical, spatial sort of or survey role or a GIS specific role. It was that at that time I also decided to go back to uni. So I decided to give it a proper crack, and I wanted to finish my degree. So I went back and started doing that part-time through USQ, actually. They had a really good online offering. And again, because I'd gone down the GIS path, or decided to go down the GIS path instead of the survey path, there wasn't any, I didn't have to be at site to do any of the practical work. So again, fortunate decision. Wasn't intended that way, but it's just the way it played out. That was really good. I actually found that that doing that at the same time was good because it gave me a bit of a way to look at the practical application of some of the things I was learning. I opted to choose all of my electives I decided to go with were computer science electives instead, though. I was very quickly coming to terms with the fact that I think I had a bit of a knack for that side of things. So I was, and again, enjoyed it too. I enjoyed building things that way and looking at just, the efficiencies you're able to build into people's days by streamlining, automating processes for them.
Yep.
That was really good. I did that for a while. I then got offered a job at Esri Australia. I decided to take it. Again, my wife was actually pregnant at the time with our first child, and I was very hesitant to make the jump because it's the comfort of what you know, and even just that, financially, I'm sure everyone knows the age-old story. The mining industry pays pretty well, and it's pretty hard to match it in your private sector outside of that. So it was a bit of a jump, but I decided to do it. Again, I just wanted the experience, and I thought there was something that I would regret if I didn't have a go. So yeah, I took that role on, and I ended up in the managed services team, doing technical support there. So I had quite a breadth of clients. It was again, it just opened up my eyes to what was possible. Having all those people around you that are very, very talented technical people and have a lot of experience in that space, I learned so much. Like that for me is the sort of stuff I love. I just really enjoy, picking everyone's brain around me and trying to understand what they're doing and how they do things and what's possible.
Yep.
And then again, after my daughter was born, and we started sort of changes his perspective on life a little bit, because it was a lot of long hours. A lot of my clients were based in Queensland as well when I was with Esri Australia, and it was, there's a lot of expectation for outside of business hours work to happen. So it was a lot of work, a lot of long hours, a lot of late nights, and it just started to wear thin. Fortunately for me, still had a very good relationship with my previous boss at Alcoa, and he actually offered me a job back at Alcoa again, back in the exploration team, but this time doing just spatial analysis. So basically just as a GIS analyst role. I took that on, and it was, again, best thing I ever did. Again, I actually so back at Alcoa for the third time. It was actually at a really big turning point for the business as well, where we were, the whole world was moving to the spatial data becoming, or the whole mining industry, probably more to the point, was really realizing the power in spatial data and understanding how important it was to manage it well and to have a process and systems and governance in place. Alcoa prior to that had never had a proper GIS team or a support service within the business outside of just exploration having their own analysts employed. So we actually, it was myself and one other person in the team. We were sort of out of goodwill supporting the broader business, but again, it wasn't. The user base started growing pretty quickly. I was approached by one of the senior leadership in the region, and they sort of said, what do you think we need to do? And I said, well, we need to build a GIS team and then actually have that full support. And they took that advice on board, and then a few years later, well, less than probably, I think it was 2024, they officially stood up the GIS team, and I was offered the role as a GIS manager. Well, spatial data manager is the term they're using, but GIS manager basically. So, yeah. And I've been in that role ever since. We are a very small team, so it's one thing, and I'm sure I'm in mining at least anyway. It's typically you run pretty lean with this sort of service. So particularly when you're not in the iron ore game either, it's there's not money coming out of your ears. So you learn to do things again. It fit well with my approach to everything, because it forces you to think, how can I automate and streamline and make processes to be a little bit more hands off. And yeah, so that role really has been about, defining the data governance and actually setting up all that process, building out and then trying to massage the 60 years of legacy information into the new expectation and the new world. And it's been really interesting. It's been a challenge for sure. Coming with stepping away from stepping away from the technical side. I haven't really stepped away from it too much. The role is kind of, because again, we're a very small team, the role is still, you're kind of expected to do a bit of everything. You're not just managing and looking at the strategy and things like that. You still become an expert in, again, in the technical side of things. And I still do a lot of development work day to day. Working on building out some of the more strategic, tooling and stuff like that, the things that are a bit more bigger picture, I guess. But yeah, look, it's still, I still love it. I have hard days, have good days. It's always the same with anything like this. But yeah, you stepping into a role. This was a bit of a change for myself. You sort of going from that. You kind of just get to focus on doing the work. Now it's a lot about managing the stakeholders and the expectations and ensuring that the things that are being implemented are fit for purpose. And then retrospectively reviewing these things and spending that time. It's yeah. Again, certainly been a journey, that's for sure. But like I said, all said and done, the whole thing's been pretty unorthodox sort of journey into this space. But I wouldn't change it though either. My experience, on the shop floor, doing things that most people who would go straight to uni and go straight into a role in this space would never have exposure to that and not understand the customer needs. And that's one thing, I've really found has been, a feather in the cap for me, is just understanding when people are asking to use the things, the service we provide, I'm able to ask the right questions because I've got exposure to the work that they're actually doing. In the time between, working in mobile maintenance, I actually did a stint in refining in D-scale. So as a D-scale service person, so, driving a bobcat inside of a tank and cleaning out scale, those sorts of things. So just having that exposure means you can ask the right questions and understand where they're coming from and not trying to, speak to the customer in a way they can understand rather than looking at it from just from a purely, a desktop. I've never been there. I don't understand the site. I don't know what's going on. I'm not actually sure how you're using the things that we've got in front that we're trying to produce for you. So, yeah.
And I do think, as you said, that career progression and taking opportunities when they've come up have given you that insight into different things. And even, then going outside of Alcoa and then seeing how, a larger software company does things. And as you said, most GIS teams around Australia are pretty small. There's a few organizations that have big teams and then the bigger consulting companies and stuff. But I think your description there is pretty common in that the GIS team, needs, because they're small, they need to look at the ways that they can automate. They need to look at the ways that they can provide that value add to the business. So then the business sees what they do, and then, it sort of can be hard, but it sounds like, even, the technical stuff with the Trimbles and, then, different parts of the Alcoa business have really set you up for where you are today.
Yeah, definitely. It's again, I'm just very fortunate that I happened to make the decisions that I made that allowed me to open up that opportunity that's gotten me here. Saying yes has helped in a lot of cases. I could have just said, no, look, I'm comfortable. There's a lot of people who have, been with Alcoa, for example, for a very long time and never leave and never have any intention of leaving. And that's okay. That's fine for some people. But for me, I never would have fit. I wouldn't know what I know now. I think I would have become pretty bored. And again, just getting that exposure, it sort of forces you to think differently and see, that one, the grass isn't always greener. It's probably one thing I'd walk away from that saying. But two, saying yes has given me the opportunity to go and learn some things that I wouldn't have learned otherwise, So, yeah, it's really good.
It does sound like that you're the person who builds good relationships as well, because obviously if you'd hadn't done that, you wouldn't have been able to go backwards and forwards to Alcoa through that journey. Because if you leave a place, on bad terms, then that what you've done wouldn't have been able to happen. And and I think it's good to be able to, bring those skills that you've learnt from those other organizations, and they've all had some commonality, but all been different as well, from, you know, uh, hardware manufacturers through to, a software provider through to, use in a mining environment. And I think these days that's really good for people to, I think, to understand that, when you're first starting out, that doesn't need to be where you end up in 20 odd years time. It might be, as you said, you might be comfortable. And I do know people who have been in, a guy I worked with at SA Water in Adelaide. He'd been there for 30 odd years, same job or a very similar job, and was very content. And I was just looking at it and going, that would drive me crazy. And but it's
Yeah.
horses for courses. So yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, and look, and I'm very fortunate that the exploration manager, so I've got a very good relationship with him, and I still do. I actually have a relationship with him, like a personal relationship with him outside of work as well. I actually surf with him quite regularly. He's a friend of mine now, but he's also a mentor. I've been very fortunate that the way things all aligned, and I happened to apply for that role, and he happened to say yes, and from there, that's the bit that he was my biggest supporter. And that's enabled me to, be able to go away and come back to the business as well, end up where I am today. Because without his support and him saying his approach to it, his attitude was, you go away, you learn some more stuff. I'm happy to have you back because you now know more than you did before you left. So you're more of an asset to us now. Having someone like that in my life has actually been, a game changer, really. I probably, may not have necessarily had as much opportunity or had the capacity to come back if it hadn't have been for him. So, I owe a lot of it to his support. But yeah, it's, and not everyone always not always going to find that person in the business that you're working in. So, you have to always look at it and go, well, how do I make the best of what I've got anyway, without that being there? Yeah. So again, partially just luck. Some of it comes down to luck, doesn't it? It's just right place, right time.
And I do think that's having a mentor through your career. Yes, I would certainly encourage anyone to try and, if it's not something that just happens organically, then it's certainly something I recommend that people seek out, through either different programs or, just being involved in networking functions and whatever. And then you'll naturally start to resonate with certain sorts of people, and then you use them for advice and reach out and create that circle of where you can get that advice and that encouragement. It certainly sounds like, from your point of view, you started off with some studies in certain areas and then changed because that change happens to a lot of people. You go to uni, all out of high school, and you're going, oh, I'm going to do this. I wanted to be an architect, and then just never studied well enough in year 12. And so then I got to year 12 and then went, all right, I like geography, and I like drawing, and I found cartography. And then that led into GIS, and so it's you don't have to make all those decisions really early on in your career, and you can go, all right, I'm going to try this, and that can be either study or work. And I think you're a really good example of that. You can pick up these skills both in work and study, change if you need to, take a risk, and go, yep, I liked it, or no, that's not for me. And then, just see what happens. So.
Yeah, and again, I think that's, again, it's spot on. Like, it really is. You when you're leaving high school, and I don't know what it's like now so much, but I know when I was in high school, it was you were going to be an engineer or a doctor. That was kind of, the two paths that you had to choose from, and or a teacher. Three things really. It was kind of like everything else was like, yeah, you might. That was sort of the niche cases, I suppose, outside of that.
Yeah.
And I look back and being I'm a very social sort of person, and that's why I wanted to go and enjoy my life a bit more and go and hang out with my mates and party and stuff and do all that stuff when I left school. And that's why, it didn't last too long, that first stint that I did in that uni. And I'm glad it played out that way, because it forced me to go and see what else was out there and get exposure to other things and other jobs. And, if I had just gone and done engineering and stuck with it, I may not have enjoyed it as much. I might not be as passionate about my career. I may just be, in a completely different space. And it may have also gone in the same direction. Who knows? But, it's just played out well for me. And it's probably, one piece of advice I would give to anyone is don't feel like you have to do a certain thing. Go and do what you want to do, particularly while you're young and you don't have things, responsibilities that mean you've got to be, paying the bills every week. But yeah, while you can, do it, because if you don't get a lot of time in your life to be able to go and do that and go and work out who you are and what you want to do with yourself, because your working life is pretty long, and if you don't enjoy it, or you can't at least stomach it, it can be pretty painful. So yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, and that's great advice in terms of just to try things. And I'll often say to people, especially in the spatial industry, you need to be willing to keep learning, try different things. As you've said, you can automate some of those tasks that to improve productivity for the business, but enjoy it. And I think learning is part of that, in terms of if you're not able to do something, but that you can learn, and that will then give you the ability to do that next thing. And so don't think it's too late to learn. Don't think it's too early to change. All of those sorts of things. And I see that, I guess probably my parents and grandparents' generation, people would stay in the one job for a very long time. And now we have that opportunity to try things. And just because you're changing doesn't necessarily mean that that's a negative. As you sort of said, your boss recognized that you left, gained some more skills, so you're now valuable again, or more valuable now that you've come back. So that's terrific.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think you're spot on. And I think, there's nothing wrong with being loyal to a place either. But I think, if you do genuinely want to go and open up your eyes to what else is going on, and it forces you to think differently about everything you're doing from a work perspective, and even in your life generally, any experience you can get that's not the what you've already got, any new experience is always going to help you as a person. So, whether it's in your career or in your personal life, it's still going to help you. So I think it's worthwhile doing if you have an opportunity to do it. Yeah.
And I do think, even within an organization, um, if you see an opportunity, then reach out to your manager, your boss, or whoever, and go, I think if we did this, and and the worst that can happen is they say no. That no, that's not in our plan, or that's not a direction we want to go. And then in that scenario, then you can go, all right, well, if that's a direction I want to go, then it's something I need to do outside. But if it's a direction the business wants to go, then I can stay here and build on that. And I do think I think a lot of people get in a role and either scared to ask about those next steps, or just they're waiting for someone to tap them on the shoulder and promote them, as opposed to being a bit more proactive. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I really that has been a great insight into your career, and I really love that from a point of view of change, but coming back and taking opportunities. And so if you're happy, I'd like to open up the floor if anyone has any questions for you. Because I certainly think there's, we didn't really go into a whole lot of, the technical side of your career, but I really liked the way that you're, have come swings and roundabouts and it's come back and you've taken advantage of it. So if anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask, Lachlan, yep, thank you. You can fire
Thanks,
away.
Dean, and thank you, Matthew, for everything you've shared so far. It's a fascinating career, and like yourself, I've just kind of gone with the ebbs and flows of my career as it's come about. Like you say, right place, right time. Dean's made a good point just then. We're speaking about, as you move through your career, as opportunities come at you, but we now cast our eye a little bit further forward and what might prove to be a rather difficult time through, technical disruption with your team, and you say very talented, capable team. How do you sort of approach both the shorter term and then moving into next year, are there maybe not necessarily, but if there are specific technologies, tools that you're encouraging of your team, how do you now approach, even the example that you've given, saying many of the previous things you used to do by pen and paper by hand, there are now much more intelligent systems that can handle that. How do you keep encouraging your team to move through this space?
Yeah, good question. And thanks, Lachlan. Look, you've just got to embrace it. Unfortunately, it's not going anywhere. So I'm very much, a big proponent of using, all of the LLMs that are available, your AIs that are, out there. Claude, if anyone's not using it, you should be, because that's the best. It is the biggest help you will find in this day and age for GIS. It's so useful in the technical space, and that's just using the free version. I hate to think what the paid version can get you, but you have to embrace it. Unfortunately, the technology is always going to change, and GIS in general has always been that way. You think about where it's come just in the last probably 10 years, it's significantly improved from where it was. And just going from, pretty much everyone was talking desktop GIS to now you've got web GIS, then you throw in LLMs and all the things that are opening up from that. You just have to roll with it. You've got to take it on board. And just, I still think it's probably easy for me to say, I'm very fluent in Python, SQL, C#, because of the time that I went through, the things that I've done in that period. So I was, coming through the industry in a period where you had to know how to do those, how to write in those languages and do those things yourself, and understanding the full technical stack, very, very familiar with, say, the Esri, an Esri platform because of just my experience. But you have to, I still think there's value in understanding it yourself as well. So not just saying, hey, do this for me, and then just walking away and blindly trusting it. Yes, you should be doing that within reason, but also try to understand it too. The idea is you still want to build quickly and produce things and being efficient using the tools that are in front of you. But I would be remiss if I didn't say spend some time trying to understand it as well. Don't just blindly trust things, And this is, I tell my team this exact stuff. It's the same thing. And again, they hate that I tell them they should be learning these things at times, because again, I've come up through a period where I had to learn these things. You had no choice because you did have to write it yourself. But they can still understand the value. Troubleshooting things when there's a problem, you can't always, or if your credits run out, your tokens run out, because these things happen. And it'll be when something fails that's critical and you go, geez, I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. It's like, well, you need to take the time to actually understand it before you just blindly trust it. It's just embracing what's there and learning it and using it, but also understanding that you still need to be an expert. We're still employed to be the specialist in this space, because we should understand how some of the things are working. You may not need to be able to write it yourself from scratch. I'll take, JavaScript, for example, not a language I had a lot of exposure to, just haven't been in a role where it's really been required too much. So I lean on, I've leaned on Claude a lot for that, and even Copilot and all the other things, even Gemini, same thing, just whatever's the flavor of the month. But I'll lean on those models to build the applications for me, web applications for me. But I'm actually learning JavaScript at the same time. Like I'm spending my time learning and understanding it, so I can actually troubleshoot it and make minor changes now in these things myself. I can read it and actually work through. Okay, I can see where the problems are coming in here, or I want to make a minor change. I don't need to go to the models every time, the LLMs, to go and make those changes for me. I can actually, slowly get better by doing that. But again, it's because I'm stopping and taking the time to learn it. I'm also, pretty curious person naturally anyway. So I guess that helps when I'm always interested in how things actually work rather than just, again, this is just the product. I can see George is on the call as well, but, he'll probably vouch for this, but, the guys on my team would say the same. I've got a very probably understand the Esri stack of like the enterprise stack far too well, out down to the roots sort of level. But it's because I've always wanted to know how it's actually working, So I don't just want to trust that the software is going to manage it for me. And that's also sort of ties into the same point too. Like with the way the world's moving now, it's probably important to understand not just from a, say, vendor-specific offering. You kind of want to, not necessarily, and I'm not saying lean into the open source. I'm more saying, so don't necessarily, just think I've got to worry about how the database is being managed as a classic example. You just trust that I've installed the SDE functionality into a database. Now it just does what it does. That's probably not always the best thing, because if something happens where you need to move away from the Esri stack, you kind of want to know what you've already got living in the database, because at the end of the day, that's where, the product or the data, the stuff you're actually responsible for lives. So, that's the bit that really matters. All the UI stuff, which is what Esri delivers for you or gives you, and the spatial analysis stuff, don't get me wrong, you still need it, but it's not anywhere near as important as actually understanding the data and being able to pull it back out if something happens where you don't have that capacity through the software that you're actually locked in with, So yeah, sorry, that's a bit of a long way to answer, I think, but yeah.
Not at all. Thank you. I appreciate
it. That's perfect in terms of, I fully support that, and from a point of view of learning what's going on behind the scenes, because then that allows you to troubleshoot and provide that advice. If your organization wanted to change for whatever reason, whether it's cost or whatever, then you actually understand it, not that it's just this black box over to the side. So terrific. Thanks, Lachlan. Anyone else have any questions? You can either just take yourself off mute or put your hand up if you've got any last minute questions for Matthew or anyone in general. Well, no, that's all good. So we could probably just wrap up there. But I really appreciate Matthew, you giving us your oversight today, and it reiterates, I think, to me in a lot of ways, that GIS is being used in so many different industries and sectors, and the technology is obviously exactly the same, but the use case for it is different, and how people get to where they are today can be very different as well. Some people, directly in starting with GIS, that's what they first do, and or it's a path that people have got to get there. So appreciate your time today, and thank you everyone who has tuned in. Thank you everyone who's watching the recording, and we'll see you again next week. Who have I got on next week? I don't know off the top of my head. I did have it up, but we do have someone interesting, I'm sure. Sorry about that. That was one thing I did have prepared, just misplaced it. But thank you everyone again for tuning in. I look forward to chatting again next week. If you have any questions at any time, just reach out. I appreciate your time and appreciate everyone in the industry. It's a great industry to be in. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Dean.
Thanks,
Thanks everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
Matt.
you.
See you
See
guys.
everyone.
Bye for now.
See ya.